Okay, so you know how we all feel like we should be studying more, right? But what if I told you that we could actually study less, like way fewer hours with our language learning, and still ace those tests and really get what we're learning?
But that's exactly what we're diving into today. It's all about working smarter, not harder, right?
That
Not just adding more hours to your study schedule, but really thinking about how to make those hours count for more.
I think we've all had that experience where you're kind of just going through the motions with your textbook, you know, but you're not really absorbing anything.
Yeah, totally. And that's why we're going to unpack all these really cool strategies for boosting your learning efficiency. It's about quality over quantity, folks.
Right. Like imagine two students. One's hitting the books for like 6 hours straight, but they're just rereading the same notes over and over.
Yeah.
The other student studies for just 2 hours, but they're using these super targeted techniques.
Who do you think is going to walk away with a deeper understanding of the material? My money is on the student who made those 2 hours count,
Hmm.
you know?
Definitely. So let's talk about how you're actually using your study time.
Yeah.
When you sit down with your language materials,
Hmm.
are you trying to explain the grammar rules out loud? Maybe even teaching them to like an imaginary friend?
I love that. Teaching someone else, even if it's just your cat, is one of the best ways to really solidify what you've learned. Because you have to think about it in a totally different way.
Right. And are you actively quizzing yourself, trying to pull that information out of your brain? Or are you just kind of passively looking over things you already know pretty well?
Passive learning is kind of a trap. It feels like we're doing something, but it's just not as effective as active recall, which forces your brain to work a little harder.
Okay, so let's say you're short on time, like maybe you have a test coming up. Have you ever heard of this reading backwards technique?
Oh, yeah. This one's a game changer when you need to review material fast. The idea is to start with the big picture and then zoom in on the details only if you have time.
So instead of reading everything from beginning to end, how does this work?
So, first, you check out the chapter summaries, any key takeaways or review sections. This gives you the gist of what's going on.
Makes sense, kind of like skimming the headlines before you read the whole article.
Exactly.
Uh,
Then you do what's called a first pass. Basically, you're quickly scanning the text, but you're just looking for headings, subheadings, anything in bold or italics, charts and graphs, things like that.
gotcha. So you're not getting bogged down in all the details yet, just trying to see how everything's organized.
Yep. After that, you do a second pass. This time, you go section by section and you read the very first paragraph, then skim the middle paragraphs, and finally read the last paragraph.
So you're focusing on the beginning and end of each section where the main points are usually found.
Right. And only if you have extra time after all that do you go back and read every single word. Now, think about how this could apply to your language learning.
Hmm. Yeah. How would you use this reading backwards approach with, say, a textbook chapter about a new grammar concept?
Okay, so you could start by reading the summary of the grammar rules and looking at the example sentences. Then scan the headings to see how the rule is used in different contexts, and read the first and last paragraph of each section for the main points.
That's really cool. I'm
Um,
totally going to try that. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about how we structure our study time. This idea of batching similar tasks has always intrigued me.
have you ever noticed how it takes a few minutes to get your brain back on track when you switch between very different activities? Like going from writing an essay to practicing your pronunciation?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like there's a mental startup cost every time.
Exactly. And batching is about minimizing that by grouping similar tasks together.
So instead of doing a bit of everything all mixed up,
Yeah.
you do all your grammar exercises in one block, then all your reading, then a dedicated chunk of time for speaking practice.
Yep. That way you're staying in the same mental zone and you're not wasting energy constantly shifting gears.
Love it. Makes total sense. And I remember you had an extra tip for batching, right?
Yes. Within a batch, try doing the easiest task first. That can help you warm up your brain before you dive into the harder stuff.
So, if you have a bunch of writing exercises, you might start with just writing a couple of sentences before tackling a full paragraph.
Exactly. Ease yourself in.
Mhm.
And speaking of making things easier, let's talk about leveraging constraints. I know it sounds kind of strange.
Yeah, like how can limiting yourself be a good thing?
Well, there's this idea called Parkinson's Law, which basically says that work expands to fill the time we give it. So if you give yourself a whole afternoon to study, you'll probably end up taking the whole afternoon, even if you could have gotten it done in 2 hours.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been there. I think it's easy to get distracted when you feel like you have all the time in the world.
Right. So the strategy here is to actually give yourself less time for specific tasks. Like set a timer for 20 minutes instead of 30 and see what
It's
happens.
like that little bit of pressure can actually help you focus better.
Exactly. And now let's talk about something that can save us a ton of time and effort. AI. I think we're only just scratching the surface of how AI can revolutionize language learning.
I'm really curious about this. What are some specific ways we can use AI to our advantage?
Well, if you're stuck on a writing prompt or need some interesting conversation topics, you can literally ask an AI tool for ideas.
Whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah,
It's like having a brainstorming buddy on demand.
right. And if you're struggling with a tough grammar concept, you can ask AI to help you create a study plan. Or if you've written something, you can use AI to check your grammar and make sure your writing is clear and concise.
So it's like having a virtual language tutor at your fingertips.
Exactly. And while it's not directly about studying, less AI powered plagiarism checkers can also be really helpful for making sure your work is original.
Okay, so we've talked about planning our time, batching tasks using AI. Now let's talk about what to do when you hit a wall. That idling trap you mentioned earlier.
Ugh. Yeah, we've all been there. You're staring at a grammar rule or a vocabulary word and it just won't sink in.
And sometimes you just keep hitting your head against the same wall, hoping for a different outcome.
It's that sunk cost fallacy. You've already spent so much time on it that you feel like you have to keep going, even if it's not working.
So, what should we do instead of spinning our wheels?
Honestly, sometimes the best thing to do is just move on. Tackle something else and come back to the tricky stuff later with fresh eyes.
So, it's okay to skip around in your exercises or your textbook.
Absolutely. Sometimes understanding a different concept can actually help you unlock the one you were stuck on.
That makes me feel so much better about not always doing things in order. Okay, so we have one last strategy to cover: prioritizing mindless tasks. I'm intrigued by this one.
So think of it this way. We have fixed tasks that take a pretty consistent amount of time, like reviewing flashcards or looking up words. And then we have variable tasks that can easily balloon out of control, like writing or diving deep into complex grammar.
And the idea is to do the fixed mindless tasks first.
Exactly, because they have a more predictable time commitment. By doing those first, you create a natural time limit for the variable tasks.
Ah, I see. So if you have a limited amount of time and you start with a big writing assignment, it might end up eating up your whole study session, leaving no time for those important fixed tasks like vocabulary review.
Right. But if you knock out your flashcards first, you know exactly how much time you have left for writing. And you might even find that you're more focused because you're working against the clock.
I love that. Okay, so our final tip is all about tagging your notes. This one seems super practical.
It is. So many people waste time rereading their notes over and over, even the parts they already know cold.
Yeah, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Right. So with tagging, you actively mark the parts of your notes that are confusing or that you need to review more carefully.
So if your teacher explains a grammar point that you don't get, you might put a star next to it in your notes.
Exactly. Then when you go back to study, you know exactly where to focus your attention. You're not wasting time on stuff you've already mastered.
This is such a game changer. All right, so let's wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground today, but the key takeaway is that we can absolutely study less and get better results in our language learning.
It's all about shifting our mindset from counting hours to making those hours count. By using techniques like reading backwards, batching tasks, leveraging constraints, using AI, strategically avoiding the idling trap, prioritizing mindless tasks, and tagging our notes, we can make our study time way more effective.
And for our listeners out there, I encourage you to pick one of these techniques that really speaks to you and give it a try this week.
Mm.
See what happens when you start studying smarter, not harder.
And let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear your stories.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into more effective language learning.
Until next time, happy studying.
Bye, everyone.